hearing. Oh, it is closed this evening. Again, with this particular matter, we are not under any timeline requirement to do this. We want to get it done as quickly as possible. And also recognizing that no matter what is done here, it will take all 4 votes to approve it. And anything short of that, it fails. And so I offer that to you as an opportunity to, in making your motions for approval or delay, whichever you choose under the circumstances. With that, I'll turn it to the council for a motion.
Deputy Mayor, I move to approve WZTA 22-06, the findings of facts in Exhibit B and the language in Exhibit A as recommended by staff and by the Planning Board.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. I would offer an amendment to the requirements that if a participant in this program wants to rent both facilities, both the primary residence and the ADU, that both must be rented for 12 months minimum. And I offer that as an amendment to these guidelines, and my theory on that I will speak to if I get a second.
Point of order.
Sure.
Is it me making the motion be the first to speak to amendments as well?
You don't have to be.
I had some amendments too.
Yeah, well, if you have amendments that you would like to pursue on this matter, let's get this one out of the way and then we can go back to you. I was not aware that you had any. So that's it. Is there a second to my motion?
Question.
Sure.
Angie, is this something we can do? Can we require that both units be, I mean, we're already treading on pretty thin ice by requiring any sort of thing, anything that goes beyond the Landlord-Tenant Act, aren't we? And if it's a primary residence versus an ADU?
Yeah, I think there's some legal problems with requiring both of them to be rented when you're telling people who they can and cannot be rented to. I'm comfortable with the provision with ADUs that they be rented to would be local, or a person with the desire to be local, because it's an incentive you receive for doing that. That's not mandatory. It's voluntary, so we're not telling basically them what they can and can't do. We're offering incentives if they do choose to rent to a local resident. I think when we're telling people who they can and can't rent their own property to, we could get into some hot water.
Just for clarification purposes, it is not the intent of my motion to in any way restrict who they can rent it to. I am, however, if they're participating in this program and taking advantage of it at their own free will, I think one of the requirements ought to be that if you want to rent both facilities, that they both be rented for 12-month minimums. That's my motion. That's my intent.
Okay.
I'm not trying to restrict what they do or who they rent it to.
So Frank, you're just talking as if they want to receive the incentives, they have to. Okay, I'm sorry,
exactly.
I misunderstood you.
That's right.
May I ask you a question about
Sure.
Real case? I will build an ADU detached, and I will rent it 12 months, long term, but I live in my own property.
Right?
So say I buy another property still in Whitefish, and I move there 2 years into it.
Right?
So I've already taken advantage of the benefits. And now my old property, I'm leaving it. And for my zoning, I can rent it at a minimum of a month each time. Will the city enforce on me 2 years after, in your motion, okay, a minimum 12-month rent out of a property that when I enrolled in the program, I lived in?
Right?
So how do you see that?
And my intention would be yes. The property would either have to be rented, either be owner-occupied, or if they was participating in the program for their ADU, and they wanted to rent the primary residence during that first 5 years, the answer would be yes. You would be required to rent it for a minimum 12 months, under my motion. Did I get a second or not? Fortunately, my motion dies for want of a second. That said, we're back to the primary motion. Giuseppe, I think you said you wanted to add some
Yeah.
possible amendments?
Well, and can I speak also to
Sure,
them?
yeah.
Okay. First of all, this is I think, a bigger deal than the data shows. We've done surveys, but we've done to the ones who could build an ADU and the ones who applied for an ADU. Nobody asked me as a WSR owner if I would have been interested. So there is a missing data. And I think that missing data offers much more potential for the detached ADU and the new zones that can have an admin authorized ADU. I'll make a bet. We will see, we've seen 39 ADUs up to today. We'll probably see at least 10 to 15 a year coming in. Having said all of this, and I applaud the council, the city staff, and planning board for working hard on this. I would like to add a friendly amendment to protect the rights of the ones who have already applied for an ADU and have gotten the permit or are in the phase of the permit, to at least extend, and I have the wording written, to extend the right to extend, if I can read it, let me read it. Property owners with existing ADUs or property owners that have a valid conditional use permit for an ADU who choose to enter into 12-month minimum long-term leases for local residents and are willing to place a deed restriction on the property for a minimum of 5 years, that the ADU must be leased for a minimum of 12 months to a local resident, may have the deed restriction that prevents the rental or lease of the accessory dwelling if the owner does not maintain permanent residence of the primary dwelling immediately removed. My point is, if we're giving an incentive and to someone who applies today and there is no primary residency occupancy required to the ones who apply tomorrow, if there is someone that has already an ADU and decides to deed it for 5 years for long-term rental, to give them the same privilege. So that's my only friendly amendment to the whole ordinance.
Ben? Do we have a second to the motion, then we can carry on further discussion?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure if I agree or disagree. I think it's very hard to take such a long and complex amendment in my head without seeing the language in front of me. You're basically saying, how do we address all of the existing ADUs to get them the same as what we're proposing here, right?
Yeah, if we can word it, we can ask staff to word it. What I'm asking is, with this new ordinance, we are waiving occupancy of the primary residency, right? All I'm saying is, the ones that already built an ADU, they built it by the rules existing at that time. But let's give them one of the incentives, if they want to deed restrict it for 5 years for 12 months lease, by saying, you know what, when you applied, you had to stay on the residence. Now, if you're doing this, we will waive that restriction.
Can I make a suggestion? What if we ask staff to come back with a proposal to bring old ADUs in compliance with the new ordinance? We pass this.
So I mean, that was one of the questions that, we discussed, is what kind of incentives can we use for the existing ones that are out there? I mean, just by adopting this as written, does that basically remove that requirement for the existing ones, that because they all have a deed restriction, they can't remove that deed restriction without the city signing off on it, since we require them to have that deed restriction. One of the incentives might be, if you want to come in and join this program for 12-month long-term leases, then the city will sign off on your ability to remove that deed restriction immediately. So you're not restricted to live in the main unit. If you want to make your ADU a 12-month lease. And whether it's 5 years or 3 years, I don't know what the best timeline is, but that's a potential. And so Giuseppe talked to me about this, and I actually put together that language that he read just as an example for him.
Can I ask a
That might be
question?
able to be massaged a little better.
Steve, yes?
Who enforces the deed restriction? City?
Well, the city does currently.
Okay. So are we going to continue to enforce the deed restriction after we pass this ordinance that allows?
That's a question.
Well, Steve, it's, the deed restriction gets recorded, so it's part of title of the property. So, I mean, enforcement's always going to be difficult. But if they wanted to, you know, sell their property, that deed restriction would still be recorded against their property, so.
Could we, do we have a process for removing a deed restriction for somebody to come in and just remove it rather than add this complicated amendment to this ordinance at the end? That's my real question here. We know we're not going to enforce it. That's true. We're going
Why would we-
to enforce the a deed restriction on a property that is out of that doesn't jibe with our current law that we just passed?
You're assuming, Steve, that the person that has the particular ADU that we approved as part of a CUP is enrolled in or promised to, in fact, lease their property out for a minimum of 5 years at 12 months a time. That's not true of all ADUs. That's not true under these amendments. Not all ADUs will be have a deed restriction on the some will have a deed restriction on the property because they're not in the program. They will have to be owner occupied, and but they won't be restricted on who they can or if they decide to rent out the ADU. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I want to just clarify, the ordinance that's in front of you allows both units to be rented regardless of being in that program.
It does?
Yes. So I just want to clarify that for you because that's how it is proposed in the packet.
Is there a second to Giuseppe's motion? It looks like it's going to die. It's also going to die a sad death. No second for that one. That brings us back to the primary motion. Giuseppe, any further discussion on your motion? None? Any further discussion on the primary motion?
Well, I have a question. If this is a poison pill, I'm going to withdraw my second. Like, if it's not going to get passed, we're not doing ourselves a favor because these two amendments didn't pass. And
to the extent that I am unhappy, and we're doing this at this particular council meeting, I want to assure the public and any other member of our council that has any concerns about this and wants to bring it back off the consent agenda next time for further discussion by this council and amendment, I will probably support this thing in that guise.
okay, thank you.
So you understand.
All right. I just want to say a couple things that
Sure.
this has been a long time coming. It's been vetted and through several public processes, and it's time that we act on this, and we can still fix it. If there are things that need to come back next time, then we can do that. But it is time to move this thing forward in this form with the idea that maybe it'll get pulled off the consent agenda. We have spent a lot of time on this, and we know we need to do it, so we need to do it.
Thanks, Steve. Any further comments from council?
I'm just going to concur, just for the public and for my other fellow council members. I do support this ordinance. I think this is an important change that we need to pass. I think maybe it's just me because I'm on the housing committee, but we have debated this thing extensively for a very long time. I feel good about what's there. I would like to see it move forward. I'm always open to new ideas. I think if other folks, I know this is a weird situation here tonight with the composition of the council that we have. If other members would like to pull it off the consent agenda at the next meeting, I will support that no matter what, even if I don't support why you're doing it, so we can continue to discuss it. But I know for myself, I think that the community needs help, the community needs housing. I think this is an important piece of that puzzle. It's been around for a long time, and personally, I feel that we should pass this when we can.
Great, I think, any further comments? That said, all those in favor? All those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Until next time.